Canadian Grand Prix just finished. A pretty good Grand Prix, I thought. So let's get right into it. So on lap 1, Verstappen on pole, Alonso alongside, of course. Hulkenberg was originally P2 after qualifying yesterday, but was dropped down to P5 because of speeding under red flag conditions during quali yesterday. So good start by Hamilton. He was up to P2 at the start, so got Alonso at the start. And then also at the start, let's see, so Sainz and Perez were battling almost all the way through Sector 2, so some really good action there, and Sainz was able to stay ahead. Also on that lap, Magnuson almost went down the pit entry, almost like trying to overtake, and then he just broke really late, but managed to hold his position. The other interesting thing to note for the start was that there was quite a variety of strategies to start the race. The top 11 were all on mediums. Perez, Magnuson, Bottas were on the hards, and Gasly was on the soft, and the rest were on mediums as well. So a good variety of strategy to start. And at the end of lap 1, Tsunoda pit for hards. Lap 5, Alonso was getting closer and closer to Hamilton, and the gaps between the field were all pretty small at this point in the race. Lap 7, Piastri overtook Hulkenberg for P6 at turn 1, and we also got our first major incident of the race. So Sargent's car was stopped at turn 7, and he was told to retire the car by the team, and a VSC was deployed. So that went on for quite a bit, and there was about, Gasly decided to pit at that point as well, I believe, but then it was very short VSC. It was barely a lap, I believe. Lap 12, Verstappen thinks he hit a bird, coming on the radio saying that he hit a bird. Nothing came of it, thankfully. Hulkenberg, Stroll, and Devois all pit that lap. And then right after they pit, Russell hits the wall at the exit of turn 9. So this would end up having massive ramifications on the race. He basically damaged his front wing as well, so he was missing half of his front wing. So he limps back to the pit, and a safety car is deployed. And I wrote down on the board that this was really rough for the drivers who just pit. And everyone pits except for a couple of drivers, including the Ferraris on the mediums, which I thought was a really risky strategy, I thought at the time, and Perez on the hards, as well as I believe Magnuson and Bottas, who were also on the hards at this point. Let's see. Then even during the pit lane, because everyone was coming into the pit lane at the same time, we had quite a few incidents as well. So Alonso was almost hit by Hamilton, who I thought was under investigation for an unsafe release. We never really saw a conclusion to that, but I would assume at this point that there was no further action for that. And same for Norris and Albon, a bit of a close moment there. And I think I wrote for Ferrari that because they decided not to pit, because they were quite stuck behind quite a few cars, including the McLaren, they at this obviously thought that their car was strong enough in the race that they should be fast enough in clean air to make up for that deficit of not pitting under the safety car. Lap 16, safety car ending, and Ocon and Bottas and Magnussen were all under investigation at this point for basically some overtaking during the safety car. So they had to, following lap, they kind of had to fix their positions to get back to where they were supposed to be. So there's quite a few overtakes right after the safety car. Lap 18, Norris basically overtakes Piastri at the hairpin right after the safety car ends. And then lap 19, Albon overtakes Piastri for turn 12. Piastri has a small lockup and ends up going down the escape road. So he has to kind of go through that kind of bollard at the end of turn 12. Ocon overtakes Bottas for P8 and then overtakes Magnussen for P7. This is kind of where those cars had to kind of rearrange themselves so no one would get a penalty. And then eventually right after that, it was said no further action for that incident. Lap 21, Norris overtakes Magnussen for P9. Lap 23, one of the biggest moments of the race, Alonso overtakes Hamilton for P2 at turn 12. So really crucial overtake there for Alonso right after the safety car, and a really clean overtake down into turn 12, which is the last corner of the Wall of Champions corner. Let's see. So at this point, Norris was also told no further action for the pit lane incident with himself and Albon. Lap 25, Piastri then overtakes Magnussen at turn 1 for P10. and Norris was then under investigation for driving slowly. So what happened was, at the very start of the race, Piastri basically managed to overtake Norris. So that means that Piastri and Norris were basically right in front of each other. And so when they pit the same lap, in order to make enough space for himself so that he would not lose positions, he started driving very slowly, which you can't do. And he drove so slowly that he effectively gave himself a 5-second penalty, which would be the result of that later in the race. Yes, so then lap 28, Stroll pits for hards. They thought on the commentary that they thought maybe it was a slow puncture, but it turns out that that was not the case, and this was actually the start of the drivers going for, most of the drivers going for a second stop, and it actually works out pretty well for him. Lap 29, Albon overtakes Magnuson for P11 at turn 12. Lap 31, the Ferraris are somehow staying with the Mercedes despite being on much older tires, and Perez is 4 seconds back from them. So even though Perez is still on the hard tires, he's still not really able to make up ground on the Ferrari. So a pretty poor showing, I thought, for Perez to this point. Lap 32, Hülkenberg pits for hards, comes back 19th behind Stroll. Lap 33, Zhou pits for hards and has a really woeful 6.3 second stop. So not great there by Zhou. Yeah, so Ferrari, if they pit now, they'd still drop out of the point. So they're really having to they're basically having to stay out longer than everyone else just to pit at the same time as them, and while only doing one stop to make this strategy work. So we'll see how it goes. Lap 34, Gasly pits for 18, comes out 18th. And then another moment here. So we have Magnuson and Devois lap 34 end up going down the escape road at turn 3. They'd been battling all the way from turn 1 of that lap, and Russell basically managed to get past him going into turn 2 because he had somehow managed to get back up there after his front wing change and everything. And I think it was a bit of a clumsy move by Devois. I don't think he was going to make that corner. He locks up, basically takes Magnuson with him down the escape road. There's very minor contact, I thought, but both cars are forced down the escape road and they lose tons of time. Lap 37, Ocon and Bottas both pit and they come out 10th and 11th. So this is really key for Bottas because, of course, he was one of the drivers that started on the hard tires. So he's basically going for a hard medium one-stop strategy at this point. Lap 38, Piastri pits, Perez 2 and Stroll somehow up to 16th despite being 17th after the safety car. And this was when Norris got his 5-second penalty, and that was because, of course, he could build that gap under the safety car so that he could pit and not lose any positions. Almost everyone else is doing a 2-stop, which I wrote down, really helped Ferrari, and this really allowed them to do their extended one-stop with extended first stint. Lap 40, Leclerc pits, and he comes out, stays 4th. So really showing that Ferrari's strategy somehow worked today. Lap 41, Hamilton pits to cover Leclerc and comes out on medium tires, and he managed to stay ahead. And this kind of sets off a chain reaction where Alonso and Verstappen both pit as well for new tires. Verstappen for mediums and Alonso for hards. Lap 44, Gasly overtakes Hülkenberg for 14th in the turn 12, and Hamilton and Leclerc gap is now down to 2.7. I thought at this point Leclerc might have an outside shot of challenging Hamilton for that final podium position. However, lap 48, Hamilton starts setting fastest laps, and Russell was chasing Albon for 7th, but was not able to pass the Williams with exceptionally good straight line speed. Lap 49, Tsunoda overtakes Hülkenberg for P15 at turn 12. And lap 53, Albon train from 7th to 11th. Lap 55, Russell forced to retire because of brake problems. So basically, even though it's not the same issue that he had that from the damage that he got earlier in the race, I think you would expect that because of the loss of downforce, he's putting more pressure, more strain on the brakes. And I said in the preview for this race that this is a race that's usually really hard on the brakes, and so basically the brake pedal kept getting longer and longer and longer, and he is forced to retire. Let's see. Yes, lap 59. Hamilton was closing in on Alonso, who is also struggling with rear brake issues. Lap 64, Norris overtakes Bottas for turn 10 for P9. So really crucial for Norris because he needs to try to make up as many positions as possible because he knows he has a 5-second penalty coming for him at the end of the race. Lap 67, Norris says that Ocon, this was a kind of funny moment, but Norris basically says that Ocon's rear wing was loose, and it was just kind of flapping about. Basically, the teams that have the front wing with one upright, sometimes it tends to wiggle left and right. And yeah, so Norris was basically trying to meet both like Ocon to get the position. It doesn't help, it doesn't work, and tries to have a look at Ocon at the hairpin. Lap 69, Perez pits for fastest lap, and on the final lap of the race, Stroll gets Bottas at the checkered flag, and Albon was gets him at the checkered flag right at the end of the race. So good move there by Bottas, or by Stroll. Perez gets fastest lap, and Albon wins driver of the day, where of course Max Verstappen wins his 41st Formula One Grand Prix, which ties him with Ayrton Senna on the all-time list. So let's go through the result for today's race. So Verstappen first, second Alonso, third Hamilton, fourth Leclerc, fifth Sainz, sixth Perez, seventh Albon, eighth Ocon, ninth Stroll, 10th Bottas, 11th Piastri, 12th Gasly, 13th Norris, 14th Tsunoda, 15th Hülkenberg, 16th Zhou, 17th Magnuson, 18th Devois, and your two retirements, Russell and Sargent. In your Drivers' Championship, Verstappen extends his lead to, what is it now, 69 points lead for Verstappen in the Drivers' Championship over Perez, who is now only 9 points clear of Alonso in second. Hamilton in fourth, 102 points. Sainz fifth with 68, who goes ahead of Russell, who drops to sixth with 65 points. Leclerc seventh with 54 points, eighth Stroll with 37 points, ninth Ocon with 29 points. 10th Gasly with 15, 11th Norris was 12, 12th Albon to 7th, so moves up quite a few positions. Really well deserved for Albon especially, and some redemption as well for Australia, where he crashed out of 6th place in that race. 13th Hülkenberg with 6 points, 14th Piastri with 5 points, 15th Bottas with 5 points, who moves up, gets a point in 10th. Zhou 16th with 4 points, Tsunoda 17th with 2 points, Magnuson 18th also with 2 points, and then Devois and Sargent still at 0. I forgot to write down the Constructors Championship, but I don't think that we saw any moves today in the Constructors, except for Williams will have moved up. They will be, they will be right behind Haas now, but they will now be ahead of Williams. So they will be 9th in the championship. Williams moves up to 9th. And AlphaTauri, of course, drops to 10th in the championship after today's result. So overall, I thought it was a decent race. I think overtaking was a bit more difficult than I was expecting. I think it was actually, overtaking was more difficult than it was at Spain, which is a bit surprising given that how historically overtaking is so difficult at Spain. But I think with the kind of layout that Canada has, it's a bit more low downforce, and generally for those low downforce configurations, the DRS is a lot less powerful than with the high downforce setups. So that's why, for example, at Monza, even though the straights are really long, generally the DRS is not that effective there. But that's all for my review of the Canadian Grand Prix 2023 Canadian Grand Prix. Good race, I thought. I'll be back probably tomorrow with power rankings for my for this race, or power rankings after this race, I guess to say. So in the comments, please let me know, who did you think was your driver today? I kind of agree with the official one with Albon. A really good race going from 9th, I believe. Yeah, 9th or 8th to up to 7th. So thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.